Good Sunday afternoon, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to another Southern Oregon Weather Weekend Update. I want to start by reviewing the month-to-date for precipitation and temperatures. We'll look at our teleconnections and see what they have to say for our Week 1 forecast and then our mid-range forecast. And then I'd like to discuss the latest signals for June and then the major pattern drivers that are going to determine our weather this summer. So first, here is precipitation as a percent of normal for the month so far. You can see almost all areas of Oregon have been wetter than normal. Here in the Rogue Valley, we've seen probably about 130% of normal precipitation, and that's largely because the last 7 days were very wet. We had some heavier showers move in, and they dropped about 400% of normal precipitation for that week when comparing that week with climatology. Here you can see temperatures too for the month overall have been a little bit cooler than normal, and again, our wet and cool weather for the last week especially have helped to skew temperatures cooler than normal for the month as a whole. So what can we expect going forward? Well, here's our current satellite imagery from the GOES satellite from NOAA. Most areas across the state are sunny, although we do see some high clouds filtering in. But largely along the west coast, it's a sunny day. And here you can see that reflected in the Weather Channel forecast. Obviously today is calling for mostly sunny skies. And then we can see a warming trend extending all the way into the end of the work week, followed by a pretty sharp cool down over the weekend with the possibility of some thunderstorms. So we'll talk about the conditions that might make that possible. So I want to talk about the MJO quite a bit over the next few minutes because this is going to be a major pattern driver not only for our weather this week but also later into the summer as well. So you can see right now we're in phase 6 according to the European model. This was yesterday. So the MJO has been moving very quickly through phases 4, 5, and 6. But phase 6 looks like this. This is the 500 millibar geopotential height correlation with MJO phase 6. You see a ridge along the west coast, a ridge along the lakes, Great Lakes and New England, and then a little bit more troughing in the central part of the U.S. That is very similar to the 500 millibar map for tomorrow, according to the GEFS ensemble. So very interesting to see how closely that lines up with the MJO correlation map for phase 6. If we keep looking at this MJO forecast, we see the MJO just keeps progressing into phases 7 and 8 and eventually toward 1 and 2. Here is the correlation pattern for phase 8. You can see there's that ridge still along the west coast. And then phase 1. In fact, the signal for ridging in phase 1 is even greater. So that lines up very well with our warming trend through this week. And we're talking about pretty substantially warm temperatures. Not just a couple degrees above average, we're talking about possibly 20 degrees above average. You can see the ridge here building even more strongly by Thursday morning, according to the American ensemble. Here are those warm temperatures I was talking about. According to the GFS, we could see temperatures 12 degrees Celsius above normal by Thursday afternoon, and that's 20 degrees Fahrenheit, so getting into the mid-90s. Normally we would see temperatures in the lower to mid-70s in the Rogue Valley at this time of year. So pretty warm temperatures. However, as we head further into phase 1 and then into phase 2, we're going to see a return to cooler and cloudier conditions. I mentioned the possibility for some thunderstorms. That's because the signal for MJO phase 2 is for troughing along the west coast in June. By that time, the calendar will say June, in about a week to 10 days. So whenever we have an interaction between a very warm air mass and then cooler air arriving from the Pacific, that can often lead to thunderstorms during the summer. Here, once again, is that signal for MJO phase 2. It's a cooler signal. This is 850 millibar temperatures. That's at about 5,000 feet. So again, it's a cooler and wetter signal. here you can see on the 500 millibar map for Saturday afternoon, you can see this trough now replacing the ridge along the west coast. The ridge is moving further inland. And this is going to be a combination that I believe will produce thunderstorms over the weekend. We're going to be under southerly flow on the backside of this ridge as this trough is approaching from the west. So we're going to have the necessary ingredients for some thunderstorms. We'll have warm air and a lot of heating of the surface. That's going to produce convection, and then we're going to add moisture from this trough that's approaching, and that's going to produce some thunderstorms. All the deterministic models are calling for some thunderstorm activity, so we'll have to see if it pans out. But I think this is a very classic scenario for thunderstorms over our area. So here you can see by day 10, all three of the ensembles are still calling for some form of troughing along the west coast. GEFS is kind of an outlier here. I'd be more inclined to go with the European and Canadian ensembles. They're more in agreement. And also the way the MJO is evolving, I think we're going to see a stronger signal for troughing stick around into the first couple weeks of June. Also, if we take a look at our NAO, our North Atlantic Oscillation, that's also with the MJO going to favor a cooler and wetter first half of June. You can see it's almost as if the calendar has some magical influence over the NAO here, according to the GEFS forecast. By June 1st, we're going negative, and a negative NAO is a signal for troughing over the west coast. So if we take a look once again at the MJO, we can see that there's a tendency for the MJO to keep progressing through phases 2 and 3 into June. Once again, that is a cooler signal. There's still some form of troughing suggested for the west coast by these composite MJO maps. So again, I think June is, the first half of the month is definitely going to be cooler and wetter than normal. Whether that can skew the whole month below average remains to be seen. But we definitely don't have to worry about excessively hot temperatures for the first couple weeks of June. So why do I mention the MJO so often? Well, one of the methods that forecasters like to use for seasonal prediction is the analog method. And I know I've introduced this before, but basically forecasters will look at variables such as the sea surface temperature anomaly pattern or the MJO or other factors, and they'll try to determine which years in the past have evolved similarly to the current year. And one of those years that's been very similar to this year is 2016. So here in June 2016, you can see the sea surface temperature anomalies were showing a La Nina developing. There were some warmer than normal waters in the Gulf of Alaska and along the west coast, some warmer than normal waters in the Indian Ocean, and that is roughly similar to our current sea surface temperature anomalies. Here's our La Nina developing. Here's the warm water in the Gulf of Alaska and along the west coast. Here's some warm waters in the Indian Ocean. Here the PMM region, here the Pacific Meridional Mode, is a little bit cooler, and we'll talk about what that might mean. But overall, a pretty good fit. Now the MJO in 2016 was also very active, much as it has been this year. So the MJO is not only an influence over our short-term weather, but it can help us identify analog years that have evolved similarly, and so the MJO can help us make seasonal predictions as well. So here, March through May so far this year, the MJO has been largely outside of this circle, outside of the null phase. So that means it's been active and has been exerting an influence over our weather. And here in June 2016, maybe a little bit less active, but still mostly progressing through all of the phases, with the exception of phases 6 and 7. So what is that going to mean for our summer? Well, here's the way summer evolved in 2016. You can see that there were some warmer than average periods and some cooler than average periods. And that lines up very well with the way the MJO progressed. The MJO maps that I showed you were mixed. Some of the phases are correlated with warmer than normal conditions over the summer for our area, and some of the phases are associated with cooler than average conditions. So if the MJO remains active and continues making circuits of pretty much all the phases, that suggests that we could see some cooler times and some warmer times over the summer, rather than getting locked into extended periods of excessive heat or extended periods of below average temperatures. So I think 2016 also offers a clue that that could be the case. We'll see some warmer than average times and some cooler times, and I think on balance the summer will be pretty close to average. Now, one factor that could actually skew the summer a little bit cooler than 2016 is this PMM region. Here, the waters off of Southern California and Baja California, they've been cooling pretty significantly over the last week. And a cooler than average PMM region is a strong signal for cooler than average air temperatures over our area. So that is a factor that could skew this summer cooler than 2016, but we're certainly not looking at an excessively hot summer. I think we're going to see a largely pleasant summer with cooler periods and warmer periods as well. So here is the summary. Our active MJO is going to favor some warming and pretty significant warmth, especially by the end of the week. However, we do have cooler air arriving Saturday night and Sunday as the MJO starts heading into those cooler phases. I do think thunderstorms are possible as those air masses collide. We're going to have moist air from the Pacific, southerly flow bringing that moisture up, and we're going to have quite a bit of convection, warm air in place, warm soil temperatures, warm surfaces. So watch for some fireworks Saturday night into Sunday. We do have the MJO looking like it will continue into phases 3 and 4. That is a cooler signal for the start of June, as is the falling North Atlantic Oscillation. Overall, for this summer, we're looking at a pretty average summer. I think the MJO is going to remain active. We do have a developing La Nina, the cooling Pacific Meridional mode regions. All of these things favor near average temperatures on balance. And like we discussed, 2016 evolved similarly to that, but the PMM was warmer. So I think, if anything, we could end up a little bit cooler than 2016. So guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Don't forget to set your notifications to receive that next weekend update. And please leave a like and comment.